So, welcome to the October Academic Achievement Committee meeting. So, with that, it looks like our first agenda item is the Instructional Council update.
Okay, I'm Cindy Peck, School of Reform Facilitator for the Middle School K-8 Division. I am also chairing Instructional Council this year, and it is the administration's year to chair the council. And just to update you, we did meet last week. We had our first organizational meeting of the year on the 16th of October. Our monthly meetings will take place at GRPS University the third Thursday of each month. And it was a fairly short meeting this year, but the things that we did, the biggest thing that we did identify that the subcommittees will continue this year. So there were 3 subcommittees that did work last year. One was did some work around the curriculum drive. The second committee was around technology, and the third committee was calling it equity, but it was looking at some of the resources and equity across the system around resources. The subcommittees are creating their own meeting calendar, and one committee does not currently have a chairperson or a person that's leading that charge, but it was felt that, and that's the technology committee, so it was felt that that was still a viable focus, and so that committee, somebody else is going to step up to the plate and take that on.
So the 3 committees, technology, instruction, and equity? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's actually curriculum. It has to do with the curriculum drive and where staff actually access curriculum documents. So there's...
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Explain equity to me.
There was some members of the council last year felt that there are some equity issues across the system, some of the different resources that different buildings have access to. Some buildings have partners in school innovation. Some buildings have literacy coaches. And so looking at some of the different resources, and those just being a couple examples across the system, and what are some of the best practices that come from some of those resources, and wanting to understand those best practices a little better. So, certainly. And then the last item that we talked about before we closed for the day was syllabi or courses that were recommended by the council last year. We would like those courses, if they have run this school year, to have the teachers that have actually implemented those courses to come back to the council in April or May to report out what worked, what didn't. We have a template that we're working on just for those reports, some criteria what we would like to see people report on and report back to the council on. So that's the long and the short.
As the teacher representative, is it the same?
Not everyone was there. There were, I believe, 4 members there, and those individuals were the same. There were plus 1 new person. So I don't have a list right now of the full council from the GREA side.
Okay, so will they have a presence at this meeting? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Good, sounds great.
Okay.
So, that's it, yeah. Board to committee.
Are we following this agenda? No? Okay.
Are we doing, well, it says prior school reports. We can go whichever one you want. You want to do it with English language learners first?
Do you want
I can be brief. That's me again. Both priority schools and focus schools, you have a document in front of you that has a list of calendar dates. It looks like this, where we've made some changes both, and I went over some changes last month around the reporting document that,
this document.
that MDE is requiring us to use to report quarterly both to them and then also to the board. And that document will come to you 4 times over the course of the school year. And what we put together here in front of you is a calendar for those reports. So you'll notice the reports will come to the school reform facilitators and their executive directors. That's the first set of dates that you see in the column, and then it refers to the meeting dates of the Achievement Committee. And then we're asking schools to attend one time. So the report that you receive will be a written report, but then schools will attend a meeting. And if you have questions for them, we'd ask you to please have those questions at those meetings, and if you can ask them at that time. If you would like additional information, certainly we can provide it at any time. But it I think, will help streamline the process and get the board the information that you seek and that schools are required to provide. And so that's the process, basically, for, and those are the dates.
So we will receive these reports on the date of the academic achievement meetings?
You'll get it in your packet.
Okay.
You'll get it in your packet, so you'll actually have it ahead of time.
But they are uploaded the weekend before.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but so this November 11th is the date for,
Your next meeting.
is it the second? That's the second Tuesday.
Is that date actually incorrect?
Are we, because this is the third.
Right, so
Tuesday.
actually, you are absolutely correct, so that date may be incorrect, so I'll revise, we can revise
That
that.
would be the
Okay,
18th, actually. Okay, just
good.
wanted to,
well, that's okay.
all right, that's fine.
Good.
Just wanted to,
Good.
that made me think it was a different meeting. Okay.
And-
You said the second Tuesday?
It's the third Tuesday.
Third Tuesday, oh, good,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, that's the 18th.
So it will be, November 18th. All right, and then one other item I wanted to mention around priority and focus schools is that we did have we had one school, new school identified as a focus school this year, and that was GR Montessori. It's a pre-K-12 school. And then two newly identified priority schools. So, and that was Coit and Kenosha. And those two schools, specifically Coit and Kenosha, have had to create a reform and redesign plan. And they recently, the beginning of October, submitted that plan to MDE. And just this week have received some written feedback from MDE. And actually then on Thursday of this week, we'll be headed to Lansing to receive feedback in person. And then they will make their revisions and submit their plan again. And that has to happen by November 18th.
Montessori or just?
Montessori, because it was identified as a focus school, not a priority school, they have a very small set of questions that they have to answer. So the process is very different for them as compared to the priority school.
Coit was a focus school last
It
year.
was
and this year.
identified as a focus school last year. It was. So, all plans and all approval will be given by January. So if there are any significant changes, and based on the feedback that we saw today, there's not a lot of changes that need to take place to the plans. But all final approvals will be given by January. It's mid-January. All right? Okay. Good, thank you.
Saving all our hard questions for Walter. So, yeah, I guess we're ready. That's the next.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We're here this afternoon to report on the ELL evaluation 2013 and 14. That's an evaluation that we do, that Walter does every year about and in reference to the ELL program in our district. And Walter's going to share some key summaries and key findings.
I think you have access to this on your shared drive, right? But if you'd like a hard copy of the executive summary, which I'll be speaking from, I'm happy to give it to you.
You got a few extra there. I wouldn't mind making notes on paper.
All right, anybody else?
The trees are already dead, so.
If you have it.
I'll bring what I got.
Nice to know you still can use it.
Thanks for having it already.
Just. Especially since we don't
So I'm presenting off the executive summary, which is basically the same thing as the full report, except I pull out the finding section and the appendices.
But you also have the full report.
And you should
right?
have that as well. And if you want to get into the specifics of that report, I can certainly answer any questions that you might have, but you've requested that when I make these presentations, that I keep it brief and speak off executive summary. So I'd like to start right at the very beginning there with the summary of key findings page, just inside the front cover. So last year, a total of 4,086 students were eligible for and receiving ELL services at the conclusion of the 13-14 school year, which was a slight increase from the 3,995 who were eligible the year before in 12-13. The district tested 3,942 students with the WIDA Access Test for ELLs in spring 2014. That's a brand-new assessment that we're using in the state of Michigan for the first time for our ELL students. And 99% of our students had a complete and valid score. So given the fact that it's a lot of students, a brand-new test, it's a pretty remarkable achievement for our staff. A total of 52 non-English languages were spoken by ELL students district-wide at the conclusion of the 13-14 school year, although Spanish is a native language of 86% of those students. So the other 14% are among all those other languages.
Wow.
Using criteria mandated by the Michigan Department of Education, 73 students were exited from the program in June 2014, which was a slight decrease from the 120 who were exited in June 2013.
So by exited from the program, that means they no longer needed the service?
That's right. They reached very high criteria that the state of Michigan sets. Yeah.
But although they no longer need the services, we monitor them for 2 years.
Okay.
To make sure they're successful.
Okay, all right.
The district employed 107 credentialed teachers to provide ELL services district-wide for students in grades K through 12. Of these, 43 had bilingual certification and 40 had an ESL certification. An additional 8 teachers had a permit status associated with their bilingual endorsement, and 16 had a permit status associated with their ESL endorsement. Permit status means that they had signed commitments to work toward their endorsements at a rate of 6 semester credit hours per year. Now, there were an additional 70 teachers with a bilingual or ESL certification who were employed in a capacity in which their credentials were not required. In other words, they weren't assigned specifically to provide ESL or ELL services, but they may have used those on occasion to meet the language needs of ELL students. So we had a number of teachers who are not assigned to ELL classrooms. They're not teaching an ESL class, but because they have specific credentials, those come into play during the regular course of their teaching and learning. So based on the total of 107 teachers specifically assigned to provide ELL services, there was on average 1 teacher for every 38 eligible K-12 students district-wide. This ratio is significantly greater than it was, or improved from what it was in the 95-96 school year when I first started tracking this, when there was 1 teacher for every 70 eligible K-12 students. So don't think in terms of class sizes, it's just a pure ratio of teachers for eligible students. Based on the math assessments, the average fall to spring conditional growth index, or CGI, reading and math scores of students in grades 1 through 8, ELL students, at cultural centers and at non-cultural centers exceeded those of non-ELL students across the district. When converted to percentile scores, the average CGI growth of ELL students at cultural centers placed them at the 61st percentile in reading and the 70th percentile in math. In contrast, non-ELL students in grades 1 through 8 had CGI reading growth scores that placed them at the 58th percentile, and CGI math growth scores that placed them at the 62nd percentile.
So what is just to make sure everybody understands, cultural centers and non-cultural centers?
So we used to call them language centers. We call them cultural centers now. So those are the centers that we place around the city, generally in the southwest corner, but there are other places as well. And they are specifically staffed and resourced to provide services for ELL students. Now, parents have the option, if they live in a neighborhood
Okay,
attendance area for non-ELL, the non-cultural center, to be bused there if their scores are very low. They can
So-
also refuse that if they want to just go to their attendance area school.
The cultural centers have a concentrated group of teachers that are ESL or bilingual credentialed.
so basically in high percentage
Right, so these
schools?
are Burton Elementary, Burton
Right.
Middle,
Buchanan.
Cedar Chavez.
Okay, okay.
Southwest.
And they're referred to as cultural centers?
Students, the ELL students who receive services actually had greater CGI scores than non-ELL students. ELL students at Union High School average slightly positive spring-to-spring CGI scores in both reading and math. I separate those out because our high school students only test in the spring, so for them, growth is measured from spring to spring as opposed to fall to spring. A considerable gap exists between the proportion of ELL students and non-ELL students who meet or exceed proficiency standards on the MEP and MME tests. So this is not a huge surprise because part of the criteria for being an ELL student is scoring low on your state assessments. And when you reach a very high, and when you become proficient in them, you actually move out of the program. So that gap is not surprising at all. In fact, it's understood and expected, but it's a gap nonetheless to be aware of. And then finally, ELL students attended a higher percentage of enrolled days during the 2013-14 school year than did non-ELL students at all but 11th grade. So the next section is the introduction, and I want to.
So is that, I don't know if this is that, do you have any sense of why that's true? Is that because the services that ELL students get encourage them to be at school more, or there's something different about this overall population than non-ELL students, or don't have any idea?
I could take a guess.
Okay.
Many times the ELL students are immigrant students from other countries, and many times those families come here for quote-unquote a better life.
Okay.
So education is really important to them. It doesn't mean that education is not important to all of us, but I think that those parents of those students are really concerned about their children going to school every day, and they make sure they do.
We also have a pretty strong parent program among our ELL students. And I
Yes.
think that makes a difference too. So we have strong parent involvement from that group.
Yes. They're
And this is a
traditionally
trend
very
we've seen
involved.
for quite a few years.
Even though many of them work 2 or 3 jobs, they make it a point, and parent involvement looks different. I mean, they may not be able to come to parent-teacher conferences, which they usually do. Those schools have a high percentage of parents showing up at parent-teacher conferences, but they get involved in other ways. They send notes to teachers, they send the grandmothers or the aunts to take their place when needed.
I think, historically, I think that's accurate, too.
Yeah, we've seen
For
that.
all the names of immigrants.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So
Well, the
what's
next
the
section is
turnaround
the introduction,
process?
and here I kind of go into the narrative.
He had a
Walter.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I was asking, how fast is the process for the student learning English?
How fast is it?
Yeah.
It's
how
pretty
long does it
fast.
take? Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see that in one sense, you see that in the graph I have there of the WIDA results. And that distribution of scores looks very similar to what we've seen in past years with the ELPA, in that most of our ELL students come to us as kindergartners or in those very early grade levels. And those kindergartners in particular, a very large proportion of them come with a very basic or lowest level of English language learner skills, English skills. And then you see as the grade levels go up that the students in that basic segment, they almost disappear. So what's happening is that we're moving kids out of those lowest language, English language categories into the upper language categories. So they make very rapid improvement, especially when they come to us as kindergartners. And then when you look at the number of students that we exit every year, it's another indication, I think, of program success. So they make very
The
rapid.
earlier you learn a second language,
The better.
the better you're going to get at it. The issues are greater at the high school level as you get older, especially if you have had interrupted schooling in your own country. If you had minimal schooling in your country, then it's going to be much harder to learn the second language.
So that comprehension of words and the vocabulary improves as well in kindergarten?
Always speaks to the parent involvement.
Yeah.
Critical.
It's critical, absolutely. So the next session here is the introduction, and I go through a kind of discussion of the history of the ELL program and how it's funded, where these students come from. They come from all over the world. As Maida mentioned, we have a lot of immigrant students. Talk about the cultural centers and how they're staffed. And then going over to page 2, I talk about how parents have the option by law opting out of busing their students. So in other words, if your child attends, is in the attendance area of Aberdeen, for example, and their language skills would qualify them for busing, you can still say, you know what, I want my child to go to school across the street. I know they're gonna get a lower level of service than they would at a cultural center, but that's okay with me. I want them to join the school that their friends are going to, so they have that option.
But that doesn't release the school's responsibility of servicing that ELL child. So if the child goes to a non-cultural center, we still require the staff to make a plan, an individualized plan for that child, because we don't want that child to get lost.
And that's why in the evaluation, we provide results, CGI scores and other results, not only for students who attended cultural centers, but also ELL students who attended non-cultural centers. So part of that is providing context for the growth and achievement that those students have as well. Then we have the questions to be addressed in the evaluation and a brief section on methodology. In other words, where do we get the information from to answer those questions and so forth. And then the program evaluation concludes with program strengths, area of concern, and recommendations. So let me just quickly go through those. Some of these are a little bit redundant from what we've already said. Over the past 20 years, the district has successfully increased the number of teachers with bilingual or ESL certification, as well as those with a permit status working toward a bilingual or ESL certification. And while the district has concentrated these staffing assets at the 15 cultural centers, there are many credentialed teachers serving in non-cultural centers, schools as well. As mentioned earlier, of the 3,942 students that were tested with the WIDA Access in spring 2014, 99% had a complete score, that is, they took all subtests. And this is a notable administrative achievement, particularly considering the fact it's a brand-new test. Some of these subtests are administered individually with students and scored individually, so it's quite a challenge. The average conditional growth index scores of ELL students exceeded the district average by a considerable margin in both reading and math. Average CGI scores converted to percentiles provide greater context for how that growth compares to a national norm group. ELL students averaged exceptional reading and math growth at the 60th percentile or greater at most cultural centers. Buchanan and Sibley both averaged reading growth at the 70th percentile. Buchanan averaged math growth at the 83rd percentile, and Sibley averaged math growth at the 80th percentile. So that's pretty amazing. Then the average percent of school days attended for ELL students during the 2013-14 school year exceeded those of non-ELL students at all but 11th grade. A couple areas of concern: Burton Elementary averaged negative CGI growth in reading, and Dickinson averaged negative CGI growth in math, and those results contrast sharply with those of the other cultural centers. Second, more stringent criteria for exiting ELL students were implemented in the 2011-2012 school year. Again, that comes from the Michigan Department of Education. As a result of this, fewer students are being exited annually. Now, before the new criteria were adopted, many ELL students were exited by the time they reached middle school, but under the new criteria, more students are remaining eligible for ELL services for a longer number of years, which is putting some stress on our middle and high school programs.
But that could be a good thing. Where's the stress coming from, just in terms of resources? Staffing.
Yeah, so the recommendations then that follow from those two areas of concern, the first being that the ELL department should work with the staff at Burton Elementary and Dickinson to understand why the growth scores of their ELL students lag considerably behind those of ELL students at other cultural centers. And this work should include a study of their model, staffing, resources, and needs for professional development. And then the second recommendation, to get to your question, Dr. Baker, the ELL department, working with human resources, should study staffing levels of credentialed teachers serving ELL students at the secondary schools. It may be necessary to increase teacher recruitment efforts in the secondary schools and/or take steps to build the capacity of secondary schools to meet the needs of an increasing number of ELL students. So the point being, because we're not exiting as many students in those elementary grades, those students are staying in the program up into the middle school and high school years, which puts more stress, strain on our staffing at those schools.
So that means you have to increase the capacity of middle schools and high schools to reflect bilingual/ESL teachers that are equipped to service the students coming up.
So with that, what questions do you have?
So, and
Interesting.
work backwards, I have a bunch. And please stop me if Nate or, you want me to stop. First of all, the scores at Burton and Dickinson, does Dickinson has as high of a percentage of ELL students?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Both schools, we are working with them and wrapping
Okay,
PD around
okay,
them so that they are being trained and have been trained on SIOP, which is Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. And those are specific ESL strategies to use not only for ESL students, but for all students. Those two schools are also implementing differentiated instruction and flexible grouping.
okay, so I want to kind of keep track of this. So, as are other schools, right?
Well,
SIOP and,
SIOP is specific, many schools, is specific to really cultural centers. Cultural centers have been and are implementing SIOP. But Dickinson has really had intensive training this summer to prepare for the future. Partly because they're a priority school.
and it
and
hasn't.
their scores were
it
low.
hasn't been necessarily prepared for ELLs, as prepared for ELL students in the past?
They became a cultural center a couple years ago.
Okay, so they're newer.
So they're a newer cultural center.
And then other models, differentiated instruction, but that's true throughout the district.
Differentiated instruction and flexible grouping is true throughout the district. Burton Elementary has also been trained on ESL and SIOP strategies. And Burton in particular, elementary, they've aligned their theory of action around the literacy piece, coupled with culturally sensitive teaching and learning.
Okay, I want to explore just the difference between so ESL is ESL and bilingual and SIOP, so how do these?
Okay, so ESL is a model, and so is transitional bilingual. Those are two models for ELL students. An ESL model is where the teacher does not have to know the language of the student, but has a credential and knows how to implement ESL strategies. The tra-
SIOP is an ESL strategy.
SIOP is 28, inclusive of SIOP is 28 ESL strategies,
Okay,
which teachers learn throughout a training. The initial training is 3 days, and then they have to come back for component training. So it's an intensive training, and then we have 2 ELL coaches in the department that help coach teachers in their job through a job-embedded PD. So we all know that just taking a PD may not always do the trick for us because we're humans and it takes time to practice. So the coaches help teachers develop lessons and teach them how to implement the strategies while in the classroom teaching students.
okay, so these are ESL strategies that are implemented,
SIOP,
but they're not necessarily by ESL certified.
right,
Correct.
Okay,
Right,
so there's
so-
ESL certified staff, so that's one level, okay? And then an ESL, I know it takes a lot to get ESL certification,
it
And
takes,
Like a
bilingual
graduate degree.
certification too.
yeah, huh?
And bilingual certification too.
Bilingual, right?
so that's above and beyond your teaching credential, and I believe that's 18 to 24 credits. But what we're trying to do at cultural centers is not only have teachers that are certified, but the non-certified ESL teachers also we want to build capacity for all staff. Because in today's world, you can go to a non-cultural center and still have ESL students. And we're getting, as the world turns, so does the conflict of the world, and we get more and more students that are of second language. So we want to do both. We want to have ESL certified teachers, and we want to build the capacity of non-ESL certified teachers so that they also know what the strategies are and they can help students out.
And then the final category, bilingual, so what does that What
A
does that-
bilingual teacher, if I'm bilingually certified, it means I know the language, and I take a proficiency test in Spanish, and I'm proficient in English, and I've taken coursework about bilingual education. But part of the bilingual certification is inclusive of ESL. So if I'm a bilingual teacher, I usually have a strong ESL background.
So a bilingual certified teacher is bilingual, but they may not have ESL certification,
Typically,
but they have a
typically
lot.
they do. or
Typically, they have
Typically do.
both.
Okay, all right.
But not vice versa.
So when we look at staffing issues, so one staffing issue is training all staff or a lot of staff to be familiar with ESL practices. But then in terms of staffing issues, it sounds like we would be better served by increasing the number of ESL certified
Yes.
and bilingual
Yes,
staff.
yes.
Okay. And is there a shortage of those persons?
Oh, absolutely.
There is a shortage, and when student teachers ask me how they can get into the job market and be more marketable, I tell them to go for their ESL credential, because that's really needed in this world. So, at the high school and middle school level, the recommendation would be that you would have at least one, in each core, you would have at least one or two teachers that are ESL certified, which is in addition to their core.
So, okay. Yeah, I just want everybody to be clear on what the concerns are. And I have conversations with my school of education often about that, so we have to get there. Are there,
Just sounds like these kids are doing quite well,
I think they are.
given all of the issues involved.
So I think we have a very good ELL program and have for many years. Yeah.
so, but basically 25% of our students are English language
About
learners
104, and that
currently,
population, yeah.
and require ELL services.
Yeah,
Yes.
the population continues to grow and continues to be a large proportion every year of our total student population.
And you'd be surprised, lately, we've been getting students that speak Swahili and Arabic in the Burton Middle, Burton L area.
Conflict in most countries.
And at Union High, is there, the language center there it's the only high school level?
It's the only high school level language center. There's two components. There's the ESL service model, and then there's a newcomers model. The newcomers is just a 1 or 2 year program, is a transition. It's not meant to be a graduation model. The newcomers is only for students that come from this country with interrupted schooling, and they are there to learn English and get the core, and then they should be able to move on and transition into the high school classes with ESL support.
And those teachers, what kind of certification do they have?
The newcomers, in the newcomers program, they have ESL certification.
How many kids do we have?
You know, the newcomers, and they transition in and out. We have 2 teachers there, and I think they have about 40 students now.
Complex educational system.
It
I
is,
think a lot of
yeah.
people don't understand
Yeah.
how varied these kids are.
Yep.
Come with all different issues and skills.
Yep.
Big task.
Any other questions?
No, very good. Just haven't seen it.
So thank you for letting
Okay,
us
thank you.
present to you.
That's really helpful in terms of our sense of what's happening, so.
Thank you.
On our agenda, actually, I just close my sheet.
Next agenda.
Comments and questions from the board?
We were going to discuss future meeting topics, but we have 2 more meetings this year, and theoretically would have a differently structured committee. Although I think that we made, assuming that,
Depending on the election.
yeah, we don't really know who's gonna be on
We're
the
kind of
board.
up in the air. Probably that should
We
plan
did make
for
the decision
January.
last year that we should, that the sitting committee should plan on January, as long as we're still sitting.
Now we're kind of in a.
But
we'll
three
have
of
to
us
wait
are
and
up
see.
for reelection, so there might be a chance that it'll be you.
You
and Nate.
guys will be back.
You never know.
You're not
Make
going
Dave something.
anywhere.
Let's go ahead, at least set, we can at least set the agenda for the January meeting. But it looks like we have next month, we're gonna be having priority school reports in November and January. We could theoretically have a December meeting, so
Let's see what-
it's December 16th. So it would be, and we can decide at the November meeting if we would have one. So are there topics other than priority schools that you all think that we should include for the November meeting? That
How many
way,
schools are we going to?
Carol and I can save ourselves some emails and frantic
How
change.
many schools do we go to?
There are 3 on the list, Union, Westwood, and Aberdeen.
We have 5 others that have been in the cycle longer.
Okay, but in terms of the ones that we'll hear from, is just these 3?
The others, I believe, are going to be in writing.
Okay, okay, so we might have some questions
We
from
may
that.
have questions for those.
But,
We gave you the new process, and I think you'll have more, a better, a greater level of detail from the new process as we hear things together.
the other thing, the other reports like the ELL that we have had in the past, when would the loop, is that, would that be coming up, or,
Loop will be later this fall.
so November or December?
You could probably put that down for January if you want to.
Okay, let's put that down for January, since,
Schools of Hope could be done in November, December.
and are there any other big topics that you guys want to return to? We looked at teacher evaluation, suspension, special ed. Actually, it would be nice to hear, from the new special ed director, and
She's
So-
smiling there.
so we would, actually, our reports are about 30 pages single space, so. So,
Then I'll have to do editing.
Walter will help. Could we do that either in November or December?
And then you generally ask for an attendance update
Yes, and that's, and when would be a good time to do that?
whenever you would like.
Well, which would be better if we did the priority schools and then one of those 2 topics for November, which would be, since you're here, would it be, or your, whatever, which should be first, attendance or the special ed?
Well, we could do a mid-year report, we could compare the baseline of September to December. That would give us a mid-year report on what the attendance is
Attendance,
looking like.
but that would be best to be done in December then?
And,
Then in November, we could do special ed?
What is the date of that?
November 18th. Actually, Mo can help too.
She's gonna say, are you kidding? School improvement. Is that too soon?
if you,
If it's too soon, we
Is that
can,
too soon?
that's okay.
Well, we have the school improvement conference in Lansing.
On that date?
And it's the first time that they've joined Special Education Fall Forum and the School Improvement Conference.
Well, then,
And
we,
we kind of promised the department we'd come out in support of that,
Right.
since we were a little pushy about them doing that. So, I'm hoping to take a team to that, and I'm happy to come back.
well, we can move them around and I can send you an agenda for November.
Okay.
We have already priority schools, schools of hope, and, we're going to move special ed back to December.
okay,
We could also move the, attendance report up. In the past, you've asked for reports from our community partners as well. Academic plan, changes in the NEEP assessment. So if I can, I think we have enough for November. And if we are going to report out, in
So for November, let's go ahead and review what is it that you want to, that you have for November.
It would be priority schools, schools of hope,
Okay,
instructional council, and the
Okay.
standing
okay,
agenda topics.
okay,
And then December would be special ed and attendance,
okay,
baseline.
Okay.
And the mid-year report.
okay,
And then January would be Luke.
okay. And what about the academic plan, was one of the things you mentioned? Should we do that in November or December, or should we? Because it is, why don't we do the, here's, one thing I'm thinking is that we will have, at a minimum, one new board member in January. And maybe it would be nice that that academic plan was presented while in January then, because that would be, and that might be a good introduction for that person. So that still means that we got a lot in December and January. So we'll have a light November then, if there's anything else that comes up.
Priority schools and schools of hope.
Okay, that's,
Would be the two, reports. And then there are smaller things that if you would like me to add those, we have community partners still, and then I think we have some of the standing reports that we typically put in on a yearly basis. If you'd like to, I could solidify that and send it out again.
it just said, yeah, maybe perhaps just one,
Okay.
reports, just to get the work done.
We have 5 of them.
Okay. And then, community partner is good, but we don't really know yet. We're thinking, if you wanted to have a community partner, because Schools of Hope exists with with community partners, right? So you want to have somebody from, so that's the United Way, right?
Yes, that's United, but we have other, WINYAC, we still have, we have new programming that has started up with, GRPL. We have,
We've heard from those, I wouldn't mind hearing from, well, yeah, okay, we can talk.
so we have several partners that we could have them on Seeds Promise.
Season Promise. WMCAT,
Yeah. We have done. And then, we've also obligated ourselves to bring back our charters.
right, actually, maybe we should just do that in November. To discuss, because well, it's not, it's a priority or focus school, right?
So I could, I'd be more than happy to, fill out an agenda through January and that you can respond to.
Okay,
I can
let's do
send
that.
out tomorrow, and then if
Okay.
you have additional topics, or if you think of additional topics, then I can also, put them on the agenda as well.
Yeah, and let's wait on the things, the testing and stuff until, like, I guess February would be a good time to do that, so.
And if you'd like, at any time, like updates from any of the divisions, then that would be something too that you might want to consider.
Okay,
I'll send that out tomorrow.
so when is Pat gonna present to the board, so we wanna, like a congressional hearing, ask serious questions.
Whatever, whatever works, but you need, how the division's doing, just to let you know, our first, fall EPAS results, were emailed back to principals yesterday, so people are digging into that data. At some point, we'll check with Ron. Let's see how.
We may want to put the EPAS results on as well.
Okay. All right, great, thanks.